Hi, I'm Kristine Weber. Welcome to my weekly live stream. It's really nice to be here with you. And today I want to talk a little bit about the definitions of yoga. I'm sorry, I'm just going to fix my camera because it looks like it's a little off. Okay, so uh, one of the things that happens in the West, which is so understandable, is that things like very complicated, sophisticated philosophy from the East get sort of powdered down into something simple. So the definition of yoga that you often hear, well, you often hear the definition of yoga is union, right? And that's actually the etymological meaning, yuj, Y-U-J, of coming together. So that makes sense. But the other definition you'll hear from folks who've done a little study of the Yoga Sutras is yoga-sūtre, right? Yoga means the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. And that's a very common definition that you'll hear bandied around. It means like stopping thinking. And also is very much in line with a lot of the Theravada Buddhism, not the Tibetan Buddhism, but the Theravada, the Buddhism that that's very common in East Asia, for example. So Patanjali was certainly speaking in response to Buddhism. That's pretty well established by the scholars. I also want to say before I go into the sutra stuff, let me say one other thing, which is that the Yoga Sutra is a tiny little sliver of the yoga universe. So it's unfortunate and that it happens that so many people in the West have the idea that Yoga Sutra is yoga. It's actually just one piece of a very large tradition, and the Yoga Sutra was sort of a convenient text to bring some gravity to this practice of yoga in the early part of the 20th century. So this idea that if it's not, I've heard people say in workshops and trainings, I've heard people say, if it's not in the Yoga Sutras, it's not yoga. And there couldn't be anything farther from the truth. I mean, we have the whole of the Hatha Yoga tradition, right? So most of the asanas are coming from that tradition, which really starts around maybe the 13th to 15th century, something like that. So we have that, and that comes out of the natas and the siddhas, who were tantric practitioners. And Tantra starts around the 6th century, although it probably starts much earlier than that, but that's when we see the first textual references. And Tantra is really where yoga was practiced, right? So like to say if it's not in the Yoga Sutras, it's not yoga is really, I would say, inaccurate. There's so much to yoga is just massive. Very much influenced by, for example, the Upanishads. And we don't know if the Upanishads are influenced by the Tantras. They probably were to some extent, or by Tantra at least, not necessarily the Tantras, because some of them are older than the Tantras. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But what I'm trying to say is don't put all the eggs in the Yoga Sutra basket. It's just one aspect. And it is an extraordinary text, and it talks about the extraordinary nature of the mind. But unfortunately, what happens in the West is we get sort of like we want to reduce things because that's how we've been trained. It's our mind has been trained as Westerners as like reductionism. If you reduce things down, you can understand it better. Works well with things like science to some extent, except then you get into quantum and it doesn't start working well anymore. But I mean, it works well in some aspects of science, but it's not so great for philosophy. Philosophy is much more complex and it's much more intricate. So the definition of yoga as the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind is what Patanjali says in the very beginning of the first chapter of the Yoga Sutras. I mean, it is the second Yoga Sutra, right? But the third Yoga Sutra is Yoga-sūtre. My brain is not working today, but I can't do the Sanskrit off the top of my head. But the English is because then you know who you truly are. And that is interesting. And that opens up the gateways to look at the rest of the first book or the rest of the sutras, right? And then the sutras go through like, what's the mind? The first book goes through like, what's the mind? And how do I know about things? And what are the obstacles that get in the way of my mind? And how do I overcome them? And what's the nature of the divine? I mean, all of that's in the first book, right? And then at the end of the first book, the very end of the first book of the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali says, Yoga is actually when all of the karmic residue is out of your mind and you're at one. And what are you at one with? Purusha. He says that later in the fourth in the fourth book. He says, you're at one with Purusha. You're at one with your mind is at one with who it truly is, which is Purusha, which means this idea of the the whole of the universe, all that is essentially. And you don't have any karmic residue. All of us are coming into this world with karmic baggage, right? And we make karmic baggage every day, and we, you know, sometimes we exhaust our karmic baggage, but we come into this world with it, and part of living is this idea of working through cause and reaction, and that's, that's life, is working through the challenges as they come through. When we attach our mind to the limitless, that's when we start to experience the rain shower. He calls it Dharma Mega Samadhi, this rain shower of bliss, this rain shower of oneness. So that's the message I want to give you today, is don't get stuck on this definition of yoga as it just means, that you stop your mind from thinking. That is not accurate. There is so much more to it than that, because when we allow our mind to come to peace and calm, then we can start to understand who we truly are, which is oneness. We are part of this oneness. I hope this is helpful. I hope this is interesting. Look at some of the sutras I put in the, because my brain was not on today, but look at the sutras I put in the description, and lots of love to you. See you next week.